What is the best way? Well, it has to be many ways, and ideally all undertaken at once. The main thing is we've got to erase 2,000 years of conditioning, false conditioning, and so it has to involve the grassroots, and it has to be at the top. Obviously, I'm dedicated to the idea that we've got to stop hearing texts read aloud in our Sunday worship services, where almost all of the people have their exposure to the Bible and who don't read the Bible themselves or hear it anywhere else. We've got to stop letting our people hear those texts which blame Jews, or actually, better to say it this way, characterize Jews either as Jesus' opponents or his enemies or in some way his stumbling block. And of course, in Holy Week it goes farther than that. But in any case, we've got to do a huge re-education project. And it's going to start at the top, which it beautifully is now, with scholars bringing together the evidence that shows that the Gospels, in portraying the Jews in that way, were not being historically accurate. And also, now at least, the church doesn't even stand there theologically on the idea that the Old Testament is simply a preparing ground for the New Testament, and that's its reason for being. So historically and theologically, at the highest levels, this kind of work is taking place, and reassessment of what the Christian scriptures actually say is underway. It also has, so that's great, and then it has to go down to the clergy. So where they're being trained in the seminaries, they actually should have to be required to take a course on Jewish-Christian relations where these things are pointed out to them. So that, and I heard this within the last 2 months, so that you'd never again hear a sermon where the Jews are the bad example, which allows us to see how good the Christians are. That kind of thing is really unconscionable. And I think with seminary education being required, it won't happen again. Another thing, there has to be more interaction between Jews and Christians at the parish level, and that also is happening. I think the number of places where Jewish-Christian dialogue is taking place are growing every year. And when I say dialogue, I don't mean that we're just sitting down and saying nice things about each other. We're sitting down and looking at the really hard texts, the ones where we don't agree, where we never have agreed and never will agree, listening to each other's statements of faith and respecting them and appreciating them without feeling that we have to change our own. So dialogue at the grassroots level is also important. And then there's some changes that have to take place at the administrative level. For instance, in the Episcopal Church, the canons of the church say that when you read from the Bible on Sunday mornings, it can only be one of the approved translations. And I've looked at all of the 13 translations that are approved, and not one of them has corrected that particular misreading about the Jews. So when I say the administrative level, I guess I mean the legislative or the canon law level. But here's the main thing. I think that if we go about making these changes as quietly as possible, it's not going to do nearly the good that we could do if we made a huge press release out of it and said, we have been wrong. We've been making a mistake for 2,000 years, and we're correcting it, and here's what we're doing. We're changing the translations that we hear read on Sunday mornings. That would end up on the front pages of a lot of newspapers it would get people's attention. And I think it would not only ease relations with Jews, between Jews and Christians, but it would give Christians a chance to be even prouder of their own faith. And people who are not drawn to Christianity would at least have to acknowledge new respect for a church that admitted it's wrong and apologized. Those are the things that come to mind.